Welcome to Coffee with a Codex. My name is Dot Porter, and I am a curator in the Schoenberg Institute for Manuscript Studies. I am the Kislak Center for Special Collections, Rare Books and Manuscripts, University of Pennsylvania Libraries. Coffee with a Codex is a weekly program where we hop on Zoom for about 30 minutes for an informal show and tell with a manuscript from our collections. And today I am really pleased to be joined by Louis Meiselman. Louis is our Judaica cataloging librarian, special collections cataloging librarian, right? And so he catalogs all of our Judaica manuscripts that come in, and occasionally he comes on and shows us something new to our collections that he's been working with. So I am going to pass this right along to Louis. Our colleague Amy Hutchins is in the chat. I will be in the chat. If you have questions or anything to say, type them in the chat. I will pass it along to Louis if you have a question that he needs to answer. And right along, Louis.
Thank you, Dot. Hi, everybody. Good to be here again, and I think I have something that's very interesting and certainly very different for you today. We have in front of us a manuscript that is already kind of in a funny format. I hope that this is visible, how this looks. For example, this piece of paper right next to it can sort of show you what this looks like. It's the long rectangular shape, paper cut short on the length, and is almost distinctive that way. It's in a 19th century binding, maybe even a 20th century binding, like if it is 19th century, probably very late. And it's got this number 981 on the bottom. I'm going to talk about what that is. And it has a shelf mark that says cheshbonot. Cheshbonot can mean expenditures, it can mean calculations. It's a Hebrew word, and it's a very broad term, and that sort of signifies that when this was rebound, and I'll tell you a little bit of who rebounded, it wasn't really known what this was. So he gave it sort of a broad title, calculation, something like that. Though this manuscript is formerly in the Sassoon collection, which is a very large collection of Judaic manuscripts, very important. And David Solomon Sassoon collected probably thousands of manuscripts over the course of his collecting career. And he saw all sorts of items, and he had an eye for important things, and this was one of those things, even if he didn't really, at least the way we see it, he didn't really understand exactly what this was. Opening up the manuscript, you get into what's the first page of the original manuscript, and you see his original call number 981. And this manuscript was for sale and went from Sassoon to being in a private collection. And earlier this year it was purchased by us at Penn, so now it's in the public again. But up until earlier this year, this was known as Sassoon MS 981. That explains what that number and that call number is. This was the original first page of this manuscript, and over here you can see the words Pinkas HaTiurim. That means ledger of Tiurim. Now, Tiurim are travel taxes. That's a Hebrew word. And sure, the Tiurim are travel taxes, and this is a ledger of the recording the purchase and payment of travel taxes for the community of Worms in Germany. Now, Worms is very centrally placed in Germany, and was also a very important, very ancient Jewish community, and they were chosen as being the administrators for this travel tax across the German lands, and across lands that today are other countries aside from Germany. I'm going to get into that a little bit later. I want to point out that Deborah Kaplan wrote an article that considerably discusses and describes this very manuscript. She wrote it when it was Sassoon MS 981. And that article is cited in the catalog record. You could go see it there. And one thing she points out is that of travel taxes, manuscripts, and ledgers, this is the only one to survive. I thought that was pretty amazing. I'll get to that later too. Now, opening up the manuscript, what you first see are lists of names. That, for example, that is a resh. I don't know if you saw that. That's also a resh. That's for Reb or Mr. or somebody important. And that goes all the way until here. I can move my paper flag. And some of these people, we don't really know who they are. They have names, but they have names, but we don't really recognize them. But there are some very important people here. For example, this is the name Oppenheim. The Oppenheim family, which includes Rabbi David Oppenheim, who was a young man at this time, and I believe he was still living in Worms. I can tell you very briefly about Rabbi David Oppenheim. Just by Googling him and looking up a little bit of the information, he's one of the most distinctive collectors of Judaica of all time that we know of. And his collection is one of the great collections in the Oxford Library today, in the Bodleian Library, and contains some of the most important Judaic manuscripts and the most comprehensive collection of rare books in the world. And this records him and his family as in his youth. And this is his name right here, recording that he purchased a sum in the travel tax ledger, and he was able to obtain travel papers. Again, this is that right there.
Joyce is asking if you can repeat his name.
David Oppenheim. Oppenheim. Oppenheim's a common name, but Rabbi David Oppenheim. I forgot to mention that he was the chief rabbi of Bohemia, Moravia, and he was to become. First, he was a rabbi in Hanover, and then he became the rabbi of Prague. Prague being the seat of the chief rabbinate. Just by going through a little bit of the Bodleian Library's documentation of the Oppenheim collection, you will see just some of the photos of the many treasures in that collection, and his dedication to books, to bibliography, and to manuscript studies. Another person, which is not named, but his title is named, is, I might need to move this just to get to the bottom. Can you see that? That right there says Hagon of Bet Din, Aleph Bet Daled. That's another very important person. His name is Chaim Yair Bacharach, and he was the Av Bet Din of Worms at the time. Actually, there was often you would have the Av Bet Din, which is the head of the rabbinical court, and the rabbi often would be the same person. In this case, it was not the same person. The rabbi was Aaron Taomim, and the head of the Av Bet Din was Yair Chaim Bacharach, and he is a very important early modern rabbi, and he not only does he record lots of his travels during this very time, which I cite in the catalog record, but he actually records this practice of selling these travel taxes in his community, and that's in his responsa, which is a very prominent volume of responsa from the time. And here we have the actual documents of the buying, purchasing, and selling of travel taxes in the Jewish community. Hold that, you can see the entire page.
Yeah, which one was it?
So that's Bacharach right there.
There we go.
This one is Oppenheim, and you have actually, after Oppenheim's name, which Oppenheim's name was written by the scribe, but then you have another hand recording different sums of amounts which he paid over certain periods of time. Most of them, I'll just say a little bit about the currency. There's roughly two types of currency that you see here. One is called Reichsted here, which is an abbreviation for Reichstaler, which was one type of coinage of the time and place. And another one you would see is called Zehuvim, which means gold, or the currency at the time was gulden. Now, with referring to the actual documents, of the travel documents, it just refers to it with the letter Tuf and then a line to refer to Tiurim, which was the name that they gave to these travel documents. The manuscript continues, naming some local important people and their purchasing of the travel documents, and continues that way until this point. And then we come to another really important part of the manuscript after a few blank leaves, and that begins here. That right there says Oppenheim, and then these are continued by many places that are in alphabet order, in the Hebrew alphabet order. Now, it just reminded me, I might have forgotten to mention, the language of this manuscript looks like Yiddish, but is not Yiddish. It's actually Judeo-German. Judeo-German plainly means that it's the German language in Hebrew characters. Judeo-German and Yiddish are very closely related, especially in Germany and in Western Europe. So how does one tell the difference between Yiddish and Judeo-German? Quite simply, well, it would really depend on which century the text comes from. But something from the 17th century like this one has to just read out the sentence, and if it makes sense in German, then it most likely is Judeo-German and is not Yiddish. The Library of Congress language codes has a special code for Yiddish, but if it's Judeo-German, it uses German as its language code because it's essentially the German language, just written in Hebrew characters. This manuscript is in Judeo-German. Now, getting back to what this is, these are lists of places that travel documents were purchased for. And what that tells us is that if somebody wanted to travel to one village or one city, they would purchase the travel documents for that city. It's unclear to me whether it could have been reused. Let's say they were constantly going back and forth between Frankfurt and Worms, or they would have to continue buying into it. But here we have a record of people traveling to all kinds of very interesting places. The places listed in these lists tend to be small villages and small places. Some of them are even hamlets. Some of them are close to impossible to find today because of the different wars and the different shifts in the borders that have happened since then. However, Deborah Kaplan gives a map in her article, if you go see the cited article, and you can see the extent of the places that people were traveling at this time. And it's really remarkable. People went into the state of Silesia, which used to be part of Germany, but now today is in Poland. There are some places here in Switzerland. There are some places here in Austria, and look what I wrote here. They go. A lot of the places are little villages and hamlets concentrated in the Rhineland, in Saxony and Bavaria, and also interestingly in the Alsace-Lorraine, or the later to be Alsace-Lorraine. Then it was in the Alsace. So that's to us, that's a very interesting source of history for these different villages and these different areas that have actual records of Jews in Worms and Jews coming from outside of Worms into Worms to go buy travel papers, to have travel protection and rights to these small places which may or may not have had a Jewish community, but they had either business interests or other interests in those places. Now, like I said, these places that you see here, and here we're already in Bet, here's Gimel. These places tend to be villages or hamlets, and at the time they probably were not more than 1,000 or 2,000 people. Later on in the manuscript, you have purchase documents for big cities such as Frankfurt, Mainz, Trier, Mannheim, and those who may be familiar with these areas in Germany know that these are important cities, and they were more well-traveled between the two, and travel was more common to these places. There were market hubs, and it's still interesting to us, that we have records of travel to those places, but it's most interesting that we have in two different parts of the manuscript, one for the very little villages and tiny places, and then adjacent but separate is for the main cities. Let me see if I can pull up one of the cities for you. The villages continue all the way out till here, and okay. Here, okay, I'm just trying to find one that brings out that point. This is to the city of Bingen, in Germany. Here, that looks like this is the city of Bamberg. And so on. This is the city of Metz. Now, let's see that. Okay. Now, some other interesting points I found interesting. Here in the letter Vav of the villages is a place called Wachtum an der Bram. Now, there's no river. When something is on there something, it's usually a river. There's no river that I could find called the Bram. It's actually called the Pram with a P, and that's in Austria. That's a very small place. Wachtum an der Pram, and yet it's spelled with the letter Bet, showing probably the dialect. Just because this is Judeo-German, it could mean that maybe the Jews or the Jews of Worms had their own specific dialect where the letter P was pronounced more like a B, and I found that interesting. This was something mentioned in Deborah Kaplan's article that I wanted to look up where this place was, and I was able to locate it there. Another thing that I found interesting was actually all the way at the end here, where you see what looks like a pasted note. And that is a pasted note. It didn't make it into the manuscript, and it was pasted later. And just like what I was showing you before in the manuscript, this is another record of purchase by Jews in a place called Lippe am Weser, on the Weser River. I believe it's near the city of Paderborn, And another very small place, not many records of there being a Jewish community there. And it's, it's just another interesting way that this manuscript was put together, or that this manuscript really came about. It's something that came about through the business practices and purchases of such documents. Now, I mentioned already that the name of these travel documents was called Tiurim. Of course, there's an individual who's in charge of it, like in any bureaucracy or government entity or council or something. There's always somebody in charge of it. And in this case, his name was Landi, or Landa, and that is mentioned all the way here. That was another thing I found in this manuscript, that we have the name, what was called the Gabbai Tiurim, or official of the travel papers. That is on Lee 58R recto. Finally, one more point I want to mention that I said before that this is the only such manuscript to survive from all the records and documents of the travel papers, only such thing known to survive. And that's actually something, it's not only interesting in and of itself, but it's interesting because noting the date of this manuscript, the ranges of dates of the sale range from the year 1684 to 1685. 4 years later, during the 9 Years' War, the French attacked the city of Worms and are documented to have destroyed most or almost the entire Jewish quarter. Of course, some might dispute that whether they destroyed the entire Jewish quarter, but usually in cities being ransacked during wars, things like these are the victims of such destruction, because they're documents, they're sometimes housed in public buildings, they're things that are not really cared for. For example, a Torah scroll, if there was a big fire or something, a Torah scroll would be the first thing that would be saved, and not really the documenting travel papers would not be among the priorities. Yet this manuscript, despite the French attack on Worms in 1689, May and June of 1689, this manuscript survives actually remarkably well, and it's in very good condition and is complete based upon this end note here and based upon the title page over here with that title. Now, finally, I wanted to leave this last portion of the video with Dot, because we do have an end leaf here that I wanted Dot to speak about a little bit.
Okay. So while I make my way over there, there is a question.
Yeah.
Question from Claire, which I think is kind of relevant to what you were just saying at the end, and that this is from Worms, and that it wasn't destroyed when the quarter was destroyed. And let me see if I can find the question. She would like to know: are there similar documents from Russia or the Baltics? Do you know?
I believe so, but I don't know if I don't know if there are any from this time. I'm just trying to recall if I've seen that. I've definitely seen that the early 20th century and the 19th century. Mm-hmm. They tend to be in Russian and not to be in a Hebraic language. Maybe some in Yiddish, but Germany and Western Europe is a little bit different than that area in Europe, because from what I understand, it tended to be much more bureaucratic and much more records heavy, and it was understood that if there was money exchanging hands, there would be a record of it, and there would be a ledger of it and a document of it, and It's been that way since medieval times, and a lot of our history can be based upon these old records that survive from these transactions in this time.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to look at this, and I'm going to ask you. Yes, I have the record here next to me, and I have to give a shout out to Amy Hutchins, who is the person who cataloged this piece of medieval manuscript that is bound in with this ledger. So first. So Amy Hutchins says, did I? So Lewis has assured me that you emailed him. You sent him an email and he copied from your email. So this is how cataloging happens, folks. This is how it works. So it appears that this is the original wrapper or sort of loose binding for this. So you can see it's been folded here. It's the same kind of size. I think this is the thought that this was originally the wrapper for this, which is interesting in and of itself, right? That there's this leaf, this clearly medieval leaf. So what is this? It is, thank you, it's a fragment from a bifolium of a missal. The missal is a liturgical, like Christian Catholic liturgical book that is everything that you need to do the Mass. So if you're going to be doing a Mass, this is the book that you're going to use, and it's going to have portions that you use every time, and then other portions that change as the church season changes. And so it is a bifolium, which means that it's not a single leaf. It's actually two leaves that are attached to each other. So when I talk about how Codex manuscripts are made, I talk about they lay out sheets, and then they fold them into little booklets, and then they sew the booklets together. And this is what we're seeing here. So this is a sheet of parchment being animal skin that's been treated to make it into a writing surface. And here is the center of the original sheet where it was folded, and these holes here are where it was sewn together. So we're seeing this here. And then we have on either side, I won't unfold that, this unfolds pretty nicely. We can see that text and music have been written on either side. Actually, maybe I'll turn this so we can see it a little bit easier this way. So you can see there's music and there's text written. This has been dated to 15th century, circa 15th century German. So this is a text that would have been used in a German church. The text is a Gothic textualis script, and the musical notation is Hufnagelschrift, which is, so it's all very German. This whole thing is very German, which isn't surprising because it comes attached to this document. So 15th century would be 1400s. So this predates the ledger by a couple of hundred years, a little more or less. And yet it sort of survived long enough to be used as a wrapper. And then we still get to have it included in the binding. So when did you say the binding was, 20th century?
I would say late 19th or late 20th.
Yeah, late 19th, early 20th century. And whoever did the binding was kind enough to include this in there, instead of doing something else with it. So that's nice. It's a really neat, the whole thing I think is a really interesting piece of history all taken all together. So I am going to go back and look at see if anybody else had anything in the chat. Let's see. Oh, Amy says it's a Hufnagelschrift, so named because the notes look like blacksmith's nails. Okay, that makes sense. Claire asks, why is one side lighter than the other? And Amy says the dark side was probably exposed when it was a cover, and I'll just show that again. So this was probably the outside, and yeah, you can see there's a big difference between that, the light and the dark there. And you can see the corners were cut. This was sort of part of the work that made it into a cover for the manuscript. So it's 12:30, so we're done. Let's all say thank you to Louis. Thank you so much. Louis will definitely be back, probably in a couple months maybe, to show us some more stuff. Thank you all for coming. I hope to see you again soon. Have a good week.